sound of cheerful, bubbly pop music and distant laughter. A low-angle shot shows a sparkling aquamarine pool, sun-drenched and perfect. The camera pans slowly, focusing on a reflection of a boy's grinning face in the water. He points directly at the pool. The scene cuts to a close-up of a man's clenched jaw, a vein pulsing in his temple. The music cuts out abruptly, replaced by the guttural roar of a pump and the sickening rush of gushing water. The camera pans out to reveal the pool, now a hollow, empty shell under the moonlight. The final shot is a single glowing firefly briefly illuminating a drained valve, the sound of the pump echoing into silence. Alex stood on his newly installed stone patio, a mug of steaming coffee warming his hands. The morning sun was a gentle kiss on his skin, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and chlorine. He took a deep, contented breath, letting his gaze wash over the culmination of 2 years of his life's work. His backyard was no longer a barren, muddy wasteland. It was a masterpiece of meticulous planning and sheer back-breaking labor. The centerpiece, of course, was the pool. A sleek modern rectangle of deep blue, it shimmered under the morning light like a promise of peace, of quiet mornings, of private, uninterrupted serenity. That promise, however, was about to be broken by the shrill, entitled voice of Karen. "Kevin, I told you to go get the lawn chairs. Don't just stand there." Alex sighed, the sound barely audible over the clatter of what sounded like an army setting up camp next door. He had known this day would come. The moment Karen, with her impossibly blonde bob and her ever-present designer tracksuits, had learned he was putting in a pool, she had declared it a wonderful addition to the neighborhood. Her words had not sounded like a compliment, but a declaration of ownership. Karen believed the world was an extension of her own personal property, and any new acquisition by a neighbor was simply a new amenity for her and her family to enjoy. He took a slow sip of coffee, hoping to steel himself for the inevitable confrontation. The fence between their properties was a low, decorative wooden affair, more a suggestion of a boundary than a true barrier. He had deliberately kept it that way to foster a sense of community, a decision he was now actively regretting. Kevin, Karen's 16-year-old son, appeared from behind a sprawling hydrangea bush, his phone glued to his ear. He was a carbon copy of his mother, but with the added layer of teenage bravado. He didn't just walk, he swaggered. His voice, a booming baritone that lacked all the humility his age required, carried across the property line as he spoke into his phone. "Dude, you gotta see this. My mom's new neighbor finally finished his pool. It's sick. I'm thinking of having my end-of-summer party here. Yeah, like next Saturday. He doesn't even use it, so it's basically ours." Alex's blood went cold. He lowered his mug, the ceramic clinking against the stone. He felt the serene peace he had been enjoying drain from him, a chilling premonition of what was to come. He stepped to the edge of the patio, his voice level despite the rising fury in his chest. "Excuse me, Kevin?" Kevin looked up from his phone, his eyes widening slightly before narrowing into a dismissive squint. He pulled the phone away from his ear just enough to speak. "Yo, hold up, man." He then turned his full attention to Alex, a lazy, entitled smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, Alex, what's up?" "What was that you just said?" Alex asked, his voice low and dangerous. "About having a party here?" Kevin shrugged, completely unfazed. "Oh, yeah, my mom and I were just talking about it. My place is too small to host everyone, but your pool is perfect. It's gonna be epic." Karen strode over, a triumphant smile on her face. "Alex, isn't it just so wonderful how things just work out? My little Kevin is so popular at school, and he just has to have a party before classes start. And with your gorgeous pool right here, it's just the perfect solution." She said the words as if she were a benevolent queen bestowing a great honor upon a lowly subject. "Karen," Alex began, his voice tight, "my pool is not a public amenity. It is not for your son's party. It's my private property." Karen laughed, a tinkling, condescending sound. "Oh, Alex, Don't be so dramatic. It's just for one night. It's not like we're asking for anything. You're not asking, Karen. You're telling. And the answer is no. Absolutely not. The smile vanished from Karen's face, replaced by a scowl. What do you mean, no? We're neighbors. This is what neighbors do for each other. Neighbors respect each other's property and boundaries, Alex countered, his anger finally breaking through the surface. You didn't even ask. You just decided this was going to happen. Kevin stepped forward, his face contorted in a sneer. My mom said we could use it. What's your problem? Are you going to be that guy? The guy who ruins a party for a bunch of kids? Don't you dare try to manipulate me with that, Alex shot back, pointing a finger at Kevin. This is my home. You don't get to claim it because you think it's convenient. Stay off my property, both of you. Karen's face flushed a deep red, a sure sign that her carefully constructed public persona was beginning to crack. You are being completely unreasonable. After all the noise you made building this thing, the least you could do is let us use it once. The noise I made? Alex scoffed. The sound of a construction crew working from 9 to 5? You mean the sound of me making a substantial investment in my home? The sound that will one day make this neighborhood more valuable, benefiting all of us? You're just selfish, Karen spat. Kevin, come on. We'll just tell everyone the party is still on. He'll come around. He has to. Kevin cast one last dirty look at Alex, muttering something under his breath about him being a psycho, before turning to follow his mother. Alex watched them go, a knot of seething frustration tightening in his stomach. The threat in Karen's final words hung in the air. He'll come around. She had made up her mind, and she fully expected him to cave. He spent the rest of the day on edge. He saw Kevin and Karen talking to other neighbors, gesturing toward his pool, their voices hushed and conspiratorial. He saw Kevin on the sidewalk, inviting friends, pointing to Alex's house, and giving out the date and time of the pool party. It was a public spectacle, a passive-aggressive war of attrition. They were building momentum, creating social pressure he was expected to buckle under. Alex tried to distract himself. He mowed the lawn, weeded the garden beds, and even went to the grocery store. But every time he drove past his house, the anxiety returned. The thought of 100 teenagers descending upon his sanctuary, of the noise and the mess and the disrespect, was a physical weight on his shoulders. He couldn't let it happen. He had to stand his ground. But how? A simple no had not been enough. He knew Karen wouldn't stop. She'd show up with kids in tow, demanding entry, ready to make a scene. He could call the police, but that felt like an extreme step, one that would make him the pariah of the neighborhood for good. He was already that guy. He didn't want to be that guy who calls the cops on teenagers. He paced the length of his patio, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. The pool, once a beacon of tranquility, now felt like a ticking time bomb. It was the source of all the conflict, the very object of their entitlement. And then a thought, cold and clear and absolutely radical, began to form in his mind. He went to the shed and rummaged around until he found what he was looking for, a heavy-duty submersible pump and a long hose. He connected the hose to the pump and the pump to an outdoor outlet. He then carried the humming machine to the deep end of the pool, carefully lowering it into the crystal-clear water. He worked in the deepening twilight, the only sounds the whirring of the pump and the gentle splash of water as he angled the hose toward the street gutter. He knew this was an extreme, almost insane act, but it was also the only way to send a message. Not a threat, not a negotiation, a statement. He was not giving in. He was not backing down. This was a zero-sum game, and he was taking his power back. The first few minutes were slow, the pump a low hum against the evening quiet. But soon, the water level began to fall, a slow, methodical descent. The surface of the pool, once a vast expanse, began to shrink, revealing the clean, gray, plaster walls. Alex watched the level drop, a grim sense of satisfaction beginning to mix with his dread. It took hours. The sun set completely, and the moon rose, casting a silver light over the scene. The only thing that moved was the spiraling water, a whirlpool, a fading light as the pool's contents were siphoned away. By midnight, the deep end was a gaping chasm, the water level so low it barely covered the drain. He pulled the pump from the shallow end, the hose now limp and useless. He stood there for a long moment, sweat slicking his brow, staring at the empty pool. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. It was done. The party was off. He had won. But as he looked at the hollowed-out concrete basin, a profound sense of loss and a strange fear washed over him. The serenity he had longed for was gone, replaced by a stark, unsettling quiet. He had protected his sanctuary, but he had also destroyed it. Just then, his phone, which he had left on the patio table, vibrated. The screen lit up with an incoming text message. It was from Karen. He hesitated, his heart hammering against his ribs before picking it up. He read the single chilling sentence. "We all know what you did." The words on the screen were a hammer blow. "We all know what you did." Alex stared at the text, his hand trembling so violently he nearly dropped the phone. The chilling sentence wasn't a question, but a declaration. It wasn't from Karen, but it was from Karen's phone, which meant she was sending a message that he wasn't just in a private feud anymore. The entire neighborhood was now an audience, and he was the villain of the story she was telling. He clicked the screen off, the sudden darkness a physical representation of the dread that had just swallowed him whole. He looked out into the inky blackness of his yard. The empty basin of the pool was a gaping void, reflecting no moonlight. He imagined 100 pairs of eyes staring back at him from the shadows of his neighbors' homes. He pictured them, huddled around glowing phone screens, reading Karen's dramatic, self-serving account of the day. The poor, popular boy whose party was ruined by the mean, selfish man with the new pool. His rational mind told him it was insane, a ridiculous fantasy. But the knot in his stomach, the cold sweat on his back, told him it was real. He spent the rest of the night pacing from room to room, the profound, unsettling silence of his yard amplified by the roar of his own panicked thoughts. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like an approaching threat. He finally collapsed into bed just before dawn, his mind too exhausted to sleep, his eyes fixed on the sliver of light coming through his window. The morning sun, which had felt like a kiss just 24 hours ago, now felt like a spotlight on his shame. The next morning, the shame was confirmed. He stepped outside, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in his hand, and the first thing he noticed was the profound emptiness of his yard. Not just the physical emptiness of the pool, but the feeling of being utterly alone, disconnected from the world. He started the walk to his car, his chest tight. As he passed his neighbor, a man named Mark, who usually waved with a friendly smile, Mark looked away, a grim expression on his face. The woman across the street, a kindly old lady who often brought him cookies, averted her gaze entirely, pretending to be engrossed in pruning a rose bush. The quiet was louder than any shouting match. It was a judgment. When he drove past Karen's house, he saw them, Kevin, on his phone, surrounded by a small group of friends. They were all staring at his house, then at each other, their heads shaking in a sort of theatrical collective disapproval. Kevin's mouth was moving, undoubtedly reciting Karen's version of the story. The narrative was being cemented in real time. The social pressure campaign was working. Alex's first real confrontation came later that day when he decided to go to the hardware store to buy some new pool equipment. He reasoned he couldn't leave it empty forever. He ran into his next door, Neighbor on the other side, a genial man named Phil who he had always gotten along with. "Hey, Alex, heard you had a situation with Karen and Kevin." Phil's voice was neutral, but his eyes were guarded. "It wasn't a situation, Phil. I just told them they couldn't use my pool for a party." "She's just being dramatic," Alex said, trying to sound casual. Phil scratched the back of his neck, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Yeah, well, she's telling a different story. Says you promised Kevin he could use it months ago and then you backed out at the last minute and drained it to be spiteful. Said you made Kevin cry." Alex felt a flash of white-hot anger. "Kevin cried? I drained a pool, Phil. What? Did he slip on a tiny puddle and bruise his ego?" Phil's expression hardened. "Look, I'm just telling you what's going around. The word is you're selfish. 100 kids were going to have a party. 100. He said it like a verdict. "I don't know what to believe, but it's not looking good for you, man. Not looking good at all." He walked away, leaving Alex standing in the aisle, clutching a bottle of chlorine. He was being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion, and he had no defense. Alex returned home to find Karen waiting for him in his driveway, her arms crossed over her chest, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. Kevin stood a few feet behind her, his phone held out in front of him, as if recording the scene. "Oh, Alex, look what we have here, the neighborhood pariah," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Get off my property, Karen, now." Oh, so hostile. Is this how you're going to act when the whole street is looking at you? When your property value goes down because no one wants to live next to the guy who ruins a 16-year-old's party? "I'm not responsible for your son's entitlement," Alex shot back. "And I'm not responsible for your lies. I never, ever said he could use my pool. You both just decided it was yours for the taking." "It's not my word against yours, Alex," Karen said, stepping closer. "It's my word and Kevin's word and the word of everyone we've talked. 2 against yours, and we both know who they're going to believe. You're a loner. You sit in your backyard with your coffee and your little perfect pool. We're part of a community. We have friends, we have influence, and we are going to use it." "What is it you want, Karen?" Alex said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What do you want to end this?" Karen smiled, a cruel, cold expression that made her look like a different person. "Oh, it won't end. Not until you've learned your lesson. And that lesson starts with you filling up that pool for Kevin's party this weekend. After you apologize to him, on your knees," Kevin scoffed, pulling the phone away from his face. "Yeah, this weekend. And it's not for me anymore. It's for all of us. You owe us." Alex felt the last vestiges of his self-control snap. "You want to play games? Fine. You want to make this public? Fine. You can tell everyone you want that I'm a terrible neighbor, but you will not get that pool. Not now, not ever." He stormed past them, heading for the back of his house, his heart pounding with a mixture of rage and terror. The empty pool was a stark reminder of his extreme, impulsive decision. He had thought the act would protect him, but it had only made him a target. He walked around the pool, his eyes scanning for any sign of a problem, a leak he might have missed. He knelt down next to the powerful pump he used to drain the water. He was going to have to get it ready to refill the pool himself. But as he looked at the pump, his mind, still reeling from the day's humiliations, registered something new. The pump wasn't just sitting there. The heavy-duty casing that housed the motor was cracked, a jagged black line running from the base to the top. It looked like it had been struck by something hard and heavy. A large, expensive-looking hose, clamp, one he had bought just last week, was missing. He looked around, his heart sinking further, and saw it lying on the ground. It was bent out of shape, useless. He picked it up, his fingers brushing against something sharp. It was a shard of metal. As he turned it over, he saw it was a broken piece of his pool pump, the evidence of an attack, of a violation far more personal than a social media campaign. A new kind of anger, cold and quiet, replaced the raw fury in his veins. This wasn't just about a party anymore. This was a direct, violent act of sabotage. And as he looked up at the moon, he saw two figures standing on the edge of the roof of Karen and Kevin's house, looking down at his yard, their faces obscured by the shadows. The two figures were not alone. The shard of metal was cold and sharp in Alex's hand. He stood under the sliver of moonlight, his heart hammering against his ribs, not with the terror of a victim, but with the cold, controlled fury of a man who had just had his sanctuary desecrated. The jagged crack in the pump's casing wasn't an accident. The bent hose clamp wasn't a random mishap. It was a message, delivered with a cruelty that went beyond simple entitlement. This wasn't about a pool party anymore. It was about a calculated, malicious act of vandalism. He looked up at the roof of Karen and Kevin's house. The two figures were gone, dissolved back into the shadows they came from. He strained his eyes, looking for any movement, any sign of them. But the roof line was still and dark. He felt a sudden, profound sense of violation. This was his home, his private space. And they had breached it, not just with their words, but with their actions. He walked back to the patio, the shard of metal still in his hand, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He had to call the police. That was the logical, responsible thing to do. Vandalism, property damage. This was a crime. But he imagined the scene. The police officer, a notepad in hand, listening to his story about a drained pool and a high school party. He could already hear Karen's version, a well-rehearsed, tearful tale of how he was harassing her family, how he had made false accusations against her son. He pictured Kevin's feigned innocence, the casual shrug and the wide, guileless eyes. He had no witnesses. He had no proof, just a broken pump and a social war he was already losing. The phone felt heavy in his hand. He looked at it, then at the empty, lifeless pool, then at the dark outline of Karen's house. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that if he called the police, Karen would spin the story in her favor. She'd turn him into a raving lunatic, a paranoid neighbor. The echo chamber of gossip would become a roar, and the police would do nothing but file a report, leaving him even more isolated and vulnerable. A new, dangerous idea began to form in his mind. He wasn't going to call the cops. Not yet. He wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. If they wanted to escalate, he would meet them at their level, and then he would surpass them. The next morning, the silence was even more oppressive than the day before. Mark, his other neighbor, was watering his lawn, his back to Alex, his shoulders squared in a posture of intentional avoidance. The other neighbors he passed on his morning. Run all seemed to be engrossed in their phones, their mail, their flower beds, anything to avoid eye contact. He felt like he was walking through a graveyard of friendships. The quiet was not a sign of peace, but of a hostile, collective judgment. He spent the morning researching. He wasn't looking up local ordinances or legal precedents. He was looking up surveillance equipment. He found an advanced wireless camera system with motion sensors and infrared night vision. The thought of setting up a surveillance system felt extreme, like something out of a paranoid thriller. But what was more extreme? Installing cameras. To protect his property, or letting his neighbors get away with this kind of malicious sabotage? The answer was clear. He had to fight back. He drove to the hardware store, the bent hose clamp and the shard of metal in his pocket, like a talisman of his new resolve. He went not to the pool section, but to the security aisle. He found the camera system he had researched. As he picked it up, a man he recognized from down the street, Mr. Henderson, a retired high school principal, walked past and gave him a long, judgmental stare. "What's the matter, son?" Henderson said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Lost something?" Alex didn't answer. Henderson just shook his head and walked away, leaving Alex to a fresh wave of public shaming. He felt his hands tighten around the box. He was an adult, a successful professional with a home he had built from the ground up. He had never had a problem with a neighbor in his life. But this situation, this woman, had turned his world upside down. She was a master manipulator, a public relations nightmare, and she was winning. He returned home and spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-vigilant isolation. He installed the cameras, placing them in strategic locations around his yard. One on the corner of the house, aimed at the pool, another on the front porch, pointed toward the street, and a third on the back deck, with a clear view of the gate. He set up the motion sensors and configured the app on his phone, watching the live feeds of his perfectly still, perfectly empty yard. The cold, sterile view of the camera feed felt like a replacement for the peace he had lost. He wasn't a homeowner enjoying his sanctuary anymore. He was a soldier on watch, defending his territory. Later that evening, as he was testing the cameras, the motion sensor near the front gate went off. He quickly opened the app and saw Kevin, alone, standing on the sidewalk at the end of his driveway. He was holding something in his hand, a small, dark object. Alex zoomed in, his heart pounding. It was a rock. Kevin's phone was still in his other hand, its screen a tiny rectangle of light in the growing darkness. Alex could see him typing, his thumb flying across the screen. Kevin looked up at the house, a sneer on his face, before winding up his arm and throwing the rock. It hit the side of Alex's house with a dull thud. The camera, however, caught everything. The timestamp, the clear image of Kevin's face, the act itself. Alex felt a surge of triumph, a rush of vindication. He had the proof. The video was clear, undeniable. Kevin had thrown a rock at his house. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't a lie. This was a direct act of aggression, caught on video. He immediately opened his phone to call the police. But as he put the phone to his ear, he paused. The police would come, they would file a report. But what would be the real consequence for Kevin? A slap on the wrist? A community service citation? It wouldn't teach him a lesson. It wouldn't stop Karen. It wouldn't end the war. It would just escalate it, making the neighborhood an even more hostile place. He looked at the video again, watching Kevin throw the rock, a smug expression on his face. And a new, more dangerous thought crept into his mind. He had video evidence of a crime. He could use this, but not with the police. He could use it against Karen. A new power dynamic was at play. He wasn't going to just defend himself anymore. He was going to go on the offensive. He had the weapon he needed to turn the tables, and he was going to use it to expose her and her son to the entire neighborhood. He was going to expose the real story. He opened the text message app and began to type, but he didn't type a threat. He didn't type a warning. He typed a single, cryptic question, one that he knew would land like a bombshell. "Hey Karen, did you lose something?" The text message hung in the digital ether, a quiet, humming threat. Alex stared at his phone, the screen a stark white square in the inky blackness of his patio. He had the power now. The grainy, irrefutable evidence of Kevin's crime sat in. A folder on his phone, a loaded gun he was about to aim directly at Karen's head. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, the cold, gnawing dread was replaced with a steely, focused resolve. He was no longer on the defensive. He was about to go on the attack. The ellipsis symbol appeared on his screen, then vanished, then reappeared. She was typing. He imagined her on the other side of the fence, her brows furrowed in confusion, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over the keyboard. She was trying to decide what his cryptic message meant, a small, delightful taste of the powerlessness he had felt for the past 2 days. A new message popped up. "Lose something? What are you talking about, Alex? Stop harassing. Me and my son, we are done with this conversation. I have already told everyone what you did." The feigned innocence, the immediate pivot to accusation, the self-righteous indignation. It was all so predictable. Alex smirked. He didn't respond. Instead, he attached the video file of Kevin throwing the rock and then typed a single damning word: proof. He didn't have to wait long. The response was instantaneous. "What is this? This is illegal! You're recording my child on your property without permission. This is a violation of privacy. I'm calling my lawyer. The message was a frantic cascade of half-truths and threats. The facade was crumbling. Alex felt a surge of triumph so profound it almost made him dizzy. He had her. She was scared. And when Karen was scared, she resorted to her most fundamental weapon, playing the victim and making threats. He didn't text back. He just watched the live feed on his app, waiting. It was only a matter of minutes before he saw a porch light flick on next door, then another, then another. The neighborhood was waking up. Karen, it seemed, was already on the phone, no doubt spreading her new, fabricated story of a peeping Tom neighbor who was secretly filming her son. He sat there, the weight of his actions settling in his bones. He knew he had just committed an act of war. The conflict was no longer a private dispute. It was now a public spectacle, with a cast of dozens of neighbors as the audience. He didn't have to guess what was happening on the other side of the fence. He could feel the eyes on his house, 100 silent judgments being passed. He was right. The next day, the social climate in the neighborhood had shifted from quiet avoidance to open hostility. As he pulled out of his driveway to go to work, his next-door neighbor on the right, Phil, stepped into his path, his face grim. "Hey, Alex, a word. Look, Phil, I don't have time for this. You made time for it when you decided to put cameras on your house and send videos to your neighbor. Karen showed me the text. She said you're a creep, a stalker." Phil's voice was full of a strange, wounded authority, as if he himself had been personally betrayed. "She showed you a video of her son throwing a rock at my house?" Alex asked, his voice low. Phil's face faltered for a second. "She said he was just joking around, that you were provoking him, and that it doesn't matter anyway because what you did is illegal." "Phil, I didn't film him on their property. I filmed him on mine. It's completely legal. And what he did wasn't a joke. It was vandalism. I have proof." Phil shook his head, looking away. "It's a he said, she said thing, Alex. All I know is you went from being a good neighbor to putting up cameras and accusing a kid of things. It's weird, man. It's just weird." He walked away, leaving Alex standing there, a profound sense of helplessness washing over him. He had thought the video would be a slam dunk. He had thought it would prove his innocence. But Karen had already spun the narrative. She had turned the one piece of evidence he had against her into a new reason to hate him. He was no longer the guy who drained the pool. He was the creepy guy who spied on kids. The accusation was far more insidious and far harder to disprove. He drove to work, his mind a chaotic mess of rage and anxiety. He had played a chess match, and he had been outmaneuvered. He had thought he was a step ahead, but Karen was playing a different game entirely, one with no rules and no truth. He had shown his hand, and she had just raised the stakes. He had fallen into her trap. He returned home that evening to an even colder reception. Neighbors he had known for years turned their heads, avoiding his gaze. The quiet, polite community he had so carefully cultivated had been shattered into 100 tiny pieces of gossip, each piece a new, malicious lie about him. He felt utterly and completely alone. He spent the evening pacing his yard, the empty pool a silent, useless monument to his defeat. The cameras were a mockery, a symbol of his paranoia. He went to his shed and found a large tarp, which he used to cover the empty pool, hiding its shame from the judgmental eyes of the street. It was an act of surrender. He was giving in, just as Karen had predicted. He had just finished securing the tarp when he heard a quiet voice from the other side of the fence. "Alex?" He turned and saw a woman he had only seen in passing. She was older, with kind, tired eyes and a face that was a roadmap of a life well lived. She lived directly across the street from Karen. "Yeah?" Alex said, bracing himself for another lecture. She gave a small, hesitant smile. "Don't listen to them. I saw what they did to your pump, and I saw Kevin throw that rock at your house last night. And I've seen them do a lot worse to other people." Karen's a master at this. She's a professional. She gestured to the empty space of the pool. You were just her next target. But you're not alone in this fight. Alex's mind, a chaotic maelstrom of rage and defeat, came to a sudden, jarring halt. The woman's voice was a lifeline in the suffocating silence of the night. He turned, the tarp now a forgotten weight in his hands, and stared at her. Her name, she said, was Eleanor. She had lived on this street for 30 years, a quiet, unassuming presence that had somehow borne witness to the entire unfolding drama. Her eyes, shadowed by the porch light from her own house, were not filled with the pity or contempt he had come to expect, but with a deep, knowing empathy. You saw it? Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question was unnecessary. He had heard her. He just needed to hear it again, to make sure it was real. I saw it all, Eleanor said, her voice a low, steady rumble. I was out on my porch reading. They thought the darkness would hide them, but the motion-activated security light across the street gave me a perfect view of the whole thing. The pump, the rock, the way they looked at your house afterwards, like it was a game, a sick, twisted game. She stepped closer, a small smile on her lips. Karen's been playing this game since she moved in. She finds something she wants or someone she doesn't like, and she starts a social war. She's a master manipulator, a professional victim. The last neighbor to get on her bad side moved 2 years ago. Said the harassment was too much. New kind of emotion, a cold, simmering rage began to replace the despair in Alex's chest. It wasn't just him. This was a pattern. He wasn't the paranoid loner the neighborhood saw him as. He was just the latest target in a campaign of psychological warfare. So you're saying I'm not crazy, Alex said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You're not, Eleanor said firmly, and you're not alone. I have no love lost for that woman. She's been trying to get a neighborhood association going for years so she can have more control. But a few of us have been holding the line. We just don't say anything because she's so good at turning people against each other. It's easier to just avoid her. Why are you telling me this now? Alex asked, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Because you're not the type to back down, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. And you've got something no one else has. You have proof. You have that video. That's her weakness. She can lie, she can spin, she can turn the whole world against you. But she can't erase what's on that video. She knows that. That's why she's so afraid. She's afraid? Alex said, a new confidence creeping into his voice. She seems pretty confident to me. That's her act, Eleanor said, shaking her head. The best liars always put on the best show. She saw you put up those cameras. She saw you send that text. She knows you're not going to roll over, and that makes her nervous. Her power is in secrecy, in whispers, in making everyone feel like they're the only ones who know the truth. But with you, the truth is out there, in a file on your phone. She can't control that. Alex felt a profound shift within him. The shame, the helplessness, the isolation he had felt for the past 2 days began to dissipate, replaced by a new, more dangerous emotion, a tactical resolve. He had been so focused on defending himself, on proving his innocence, that he hadn't seen the war for what it was, a game, and he had a new teammate. What do I do? Alex asked, the words coming out with a new sense of purpose. Eleanor smiled, a knowing expression on her face. You don't do anything alone. You have the video, and I have the eyes of a witness. Let's make a plan. They sat on his front porch for the next hour, a conspiratorial huddle in the growing dark. Eleanor laid out the neighborhood's social landscape like a battlefield map. She identified the key players, the gossips, the fence-sitters, the few who had seen through Karen's facade. She told him of other incidents. A time Karen claimed her mail had been stolen to get a neighbor in trouble. Another time she blamed a neighbor's dog for a mess her own son had made. She was a textbook narcissist. an expert in gaslighting and manipulation. "You can't just show the video," Eleanor explained. "She'll just say it's edited or illegal or that you're a stalker. You need to confront her, and you need to do it with a witness. And not a video witness, but a live one. Me." Alex's mind raced, 100 new scenarios playing out. The confrontation he had imagined, a panicked, angry shout from his driveway, was replaced by a calculated, strategic assault. This was no longer a matter of pride. It was a matter of justice. The next morning, Alex woke up with a new sense of purpose. He shaved, put on a clean shirt, and felt a profound sense of calm. The tarp was still on the pool, but it no longer felt like a symbol of defeat. It felt like a cover for a trap. He called Eleanor, and they made their final plan. At 6 p.m., they would meet on the street near the middle of the block. He would have his phone in his hand, the video ready to go. Eleanor would be there, a physical reminder that his testimony was not just his own. He spent the morning getting his affairs in order, a small act of finality before the impending battle. He ate a good lunch, took a deep breath, and walked out, his front door. He could feel the eyes on him as he walked down the street, the silent, invisible scrutiny of the neighborhood. He ignored them. He was on a mission. Eleanor was already there, a small, dignified woman standing on the corner of the sidewalk, a book in her hand as if she were waiting for the bus. He walked up to her, his heart a steady drumbeat in his chest. "Ready?" he asked. "Born ready," she said with a quiet smile. They didn't have to wait long. Karen, predictably, appeared from her front door, a pair of sunglasses perched on her nose. She saw them, a small, puzzled frown creasing her brow. She was about to go to her car when Alex's voice stopped her. "Karen!" he called out. His voice was firm, steady, and loud enough for anyone listening from their windows to hear. She turned, her mouth already in a pout, her body language radiating practiced annoyance. "What is it, Alex? I'm busy. I told you I'm done with this." "We're not done," Alex said, taking a step toward her. "Not until we have a little chat about the damage to my pump and about this." He held up his phone, the video, of Kevin throwing the rock visible on the screen. Karen's eyes narrowed. "I told you, that's illegal. You have no right to film my son," she shrieked, her voice suddenly high and shrill. "I have every right to film criminal activity on my own property," Alex said calmly. "And lucky for me, I'm not the only one who saw it." He gestured to Eleanor, who stepped forward. "I was on my porch," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I saw your son throw a rock at Alex's house. I also saw him and another boy on your roof the night before. I can corroborate everything." Karen's face, which had been a mask of feigned outrage, went blank with shock. The blood drained from her face. She looked at Eleanor, a woman she had never seen as a threat, a woman she had considered a non-entity. The look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated terror. The echo chamber, her most powerful weapon, had just been breached. A car drove by, slowing down as it passed them, the driver craning their neck to see what was happening. A neighbor across the street pretending to water their lawn suddenly froze, their hose still running. The crowd was gathering not in whispers, but in silent public observation. "You're lying," Karen stammered, her voice trembling. "Both of you. This is harassment. I'm going to call the police." "You do that," Alex said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Tell them you're being harassed by a homeowner with video evidence and a live witness. See what they say. Because I'm not just going to stop here, Karen. I'm going to send this video to every person on this street. I'm going to tell them what you're really like. This isn't about a pool party anymore. It's about your lies. And your consequences are just beginning." Karen stood there, speechless, the color slowly returning to her face, a new kind of fury building in her eyes. But it wasn't the confident, self-righteous anger of before. It was the cornered, desperate rage of a predator who had just realized she was now the prey. She looked at Alex, then at Eleanor, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, Alex saw the mask fall entirely. He saw not a wronged mother, but a cold, calculating woman, a sociopath who had just realized her game was over. And in that moment of perfect clarity, Karen's eyes darted past Alex and Eleanor to the car that was pulling, into the driveway across the street, her husband home from work. He had a look of confusion on his face as he stepped out of his car, his keys still in his hand, a phone pressed to his ear. Kevin, in the passenger seat, was looking at Karen with an expression of pure, unadulterated fear. It seemed he wasn't the only one getting messages.